Hello, welcome to the Brain Scrub, a somewhat improvised approach to mental health. My name is Glenn Sollers, and welcome to Season 2, Episode number 1. And I thought this season I would begin with the end in mind, and that is death. And not that this person who's my guest today represents death in any way. However, she is quite the opposite. She lives her life to the fullest. I've always admired her. I've known Carol Bages for, gosh, I don't know, 19 years. However, haven't seen her for a long time. And then I moved to this new neighborhood in News Bay. And who's on the trail? Carol Bages. And it's been such an honor to get to know her at a different level now. She knew me in different circumstances way back when. And she inspires me. And the reason I wanted to have her on the show is we had a conversation recently about illness and about a recent bike accident that I got into, and which led to a whole conversation. So Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn.
It's lovely to have you here.
Yes, and I just want to point out that he was a real wuss about going to the doctor, which is how this all came about.
Yeah, it did. And I have a fear of death. I always have. I think I shared with you when I was a kid, probably around 6 years old. My dad was like this Cold War guy from East Germany. And he said, we are all going to die. The Russians are going to attack. Well, back then the USSR. So I grew up fearful of death. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm only here once. And then I die. And then when I saw you a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about my rib injury and on the bike accident, and then you said, well, Glenn, I know somebody who went through that and they got a scan and they ended up having cancer. And I
like, it was totally the wrong thing to say. I felt bad for a week.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. But then I thought, what a wuss. He needed to get it checked.
Yes. And I think a lot of people have a fear of, I know I do, a fear of the
finding out,
because you always find out people get a disease and then a month later, whatever, they're dead.
Right. And I've always thought the worst thing that can happen to me is I die. Therefore, I may as well do it.
Yeah. Okay. And I've been hoping, and if you want, you can share with us how you came about having this type of attitude, if you've always had it, or is it just something that came through for you? Because, and the reason I'm asking this, Carol, is obviously death is the end of it for most. Of course, I think people have religion and they believe in certain things because then death doesn't seem as bad. Like you go to a better place. You don't go to hell if you believe in God, you go to heaven, and if you don't, you'll go to hell. And so I think belief is powerful in many ways. I'm not a religious person, and just want to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I'm not a religious person either, but fear of death is, I don't think fear of death I've always had because I'm a fifth child. So you grow up being the youngest of five, and there's always an element of fear, always, because you're the target. So I think that prepared me with strength and cunningness, connivingness. You know, you develop a Machiavelli approach when you have no physical strength and or intellectual strength to deal with people who are 10 years older when you're a 5-year-old. So I think that sort of gave me a very good basis for my somewhat warped personality. And it's the only thing I can think of that would explain how I approach things. But so I've always just had this, sort of thought that the worst thing is I end up dead. I can't explain it. I just think that, okay, ding. I know the outcome, therefore I don't have to fear it.
And you developed that at a young age, so you had a different perspective. Okay, so being the youngest, you always had to fight for what you want, and I can assure you, in terms of my experience of you, is you definitely speak your mind, you speak your truth, and it's like, take action now, don't wait, do things. And so you're saying that came a lot from your childhood in what you had to deal with.
Yeah, I think, there's some people that are the youngest that are coddled and, but when you grow up in the 60s, that wasn't the case. It was survivalist. Nowadays a youngest is probably much more coddled and much more taken care of in the family environment. But in the 60s, your parents were off busy doing their own life. They didn't, helicopter parent or hold your hand going to school or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I rode my bike to school when I was 5. And it was a long way by myself. Nowadays, parents don't allow their kids to do that. They drop them off, they pick them up. And so I don't know if kids have a healthy fear, except for what maybe their parents try to instill into them. But I think we coddle our kids.
And when it comes to your children, how would you describe how that translated into how you parented?
Well, I mean, I think I always had a fear for my kids. And so it probably came across in weird ways. But that was because of circumstance. And I think the worst thing that happened, or maybe the best, who knows, is I worked with Cornelia King, whose child was kidnapped by Clifford Olson. And when I was pregnant with my son, she came and sat beside me and said, "Don't take your eyes off him, ever." And that, sort of really made me grow up and think, okay, it's my job to protect the kids. And so I did take that very seriously. And so I raised them with freedom. And now that they're in their 20s and I found out all the stuff they did that I didn't know, I don't think they had a fear of anything. Mm-hmm. So they did live freely, but not freely like I did. My mom would not even know where I was half the time. Mm-hmm. Under the age of 7. Because you'd just be out in the neighborhood playing. So it's a different kind of growing up, I think, now, or it's just more prevalent, or we're just more aware of all the things that can happen to kids and how horrible that would be.
So you went from, as a youngster, self-preservation, and you had to be a certain way because you're protecting yourself against your siblings. You're the youngest. And then you then learned, I better protect my children and be there for them. And how has that impacted them? Like, how would you define your influence over your kids in terms of who they are now and what they do?
Well, I think, obviously it's not just me, because I have a great husband who also, balances me out in a lot of ways. But we didn't coddle our kids. We disciplined our children. We made them work for things. They weren't given everything. And we traveled with them a lot, including when they were 6 and 8, backpacking to Europe. Mm-hmm. So they also grew up experiencing a lot of different things, and I think that's helped them as an adult. My daughter is now living in London and loving life, and so I feel pretty good about the way they grew up. They're good people, they're funny people, and they're kind people. Ding, my job is done. So whether it was a good job or not, they are good people. And it's not going to be the same for everybody, but they certainly are happy, healthy, and, successful in their own right. And that's all we ever said, is just be self-supporting, be happy, and be on your own. Mm-hmm. And they are.
And of course they're younger, like I'm in my 50s. And so I'm experiencing people dying around me. So it's elevated the fear that I used to have. And of course, when I was younger, I didn't have such fears as I do now in terms of the fear of death, fear of cancer, and all these different things. If you were to ask your kids right now, what is your perspective on death? What might they say?
Well, I think both my kids have realized that they aren't invincible. So they're just coming out of the invincibility phase, as I like to, the early 20s where nothing can happen to you. But my daughter, broke bones constantly growing up. I lost track. So she always had a healthy understanding that she wasn't invincible. Whereas my son, being a boy, straight ahead, straight on, straight up, and I'll, look back when I've finished.
Yeah.
So, but now he's coming out of that phase because he's had some health issues. So I guess it happens to everyone. And I wouldn't want to change that, because what an awesome time in your 20s when you are invincible and you're not thinking about death, and why should you?
Mm-hmm.
There is no reason until you have to.
Yes. And death is, my dad used to say, death is final.
But
That's
we don't
it.
know that.
Yeah, we don't know that.
We don't know that. We have no idea. And it was like when I was pregnant and I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because as you know, I'm like a Chihuahua and my husband's like a Great Dane. And I didn't think about what that would look like until I was, very pregnant. And then it just occurred to me that millions upon millions of people have done this before in lesser circumstances, from the cave days on. And that translates over to death when you think about, okay, whatever it is that happens, millions and millions of people have done it before. Therefore, it's the path. It's well carved. It's well grooved.
So why do you think people are fearful of death?
I mean, there can probably be a million reasons, but, in how they grow up, or what they're afraid to lose, or as they get closer to what is the norm of when you die, they start to, for the first time, think about that where they probably haven't thought about it before. And once you start thinking about it, then you start to scare yourself. Because you have no information on it, because it's not like anyone who's died can tell you what it's like to die. And it's probably different for every single human being.
For sure.
So, but for me, I had a surgery, and when I came out of the surgery, I did not feel good. And they just kept pumping me full of drugs, which really just inhibited my ability to, verbalize what was going on with me. Not that I really knew what was going on with me, I just knew that things weren't going well. And as it turned out, I was slowly internal bleeding. And so they left me for 3 days and just kept pumping me full of more drugs, which, was a vicious circle of me not being able to articulate that things weren't going my way and I wasn't feeling like I was coming out of it. And then I was in a hospital and there was an elderly woman next to me, and I woke up in the morning and I looked over at her, and it was just one of those looks that you can probably only do in the moment, where I just said to her, I'm going. And she looked at me and literally, time stopped. And I couldn't do anything. And I remember I had this little cardboard, what is it, like a little barf bucket, those brown things next to me. And then all of a sudden I just, spit out gray ash into this little bucket. And I looked at it, and then I just closed my eyes. Now, after the fact, I guess she was buzzing the nurse to beat the band, and she was, probably in her late 80s, the poor little thing. And they, immediately, bells are ringing and whistling. But for me, I was already inside. The hospital, the people, the noises were becoming very, very distant and very irrelevant, for lack of a better description, because I knew I was dying. And I didn't think about my kids, I didn't think about my husband or my friends or anything. I just went inside. And so all this, stuff as they're rushing me for CT scans and everything else is going on. And I remember just little snippets. But for me, I was in a fetal position on the gurney, and I was very relaxed. And it was okay. So, obviously I didn't die. They sorted me out. I ended up getting a full emergency blood transfusion because basically, I was 20 points below where they transfuse people to save their lives. So I was well on my way out. And they did give me a blood transfusion, and I still to this day, it was very annoying that they didn't have time to warm it. So that was nasty. And then once I had the blood transfusion, I slowly came out of it. They stopped giving me the drugs, and we sorted everything out. But for me, I guess the most impactful thing was just how relaxing it was and how irrelevant everything else around you becomes. Because it's your own little journey. And for me, I just absolutely was inside. And nothing else mattered around me. So therefore, that's what I said to you. I said, for me, I think dying is probably, and again, it's going to be different, but hopefully the last few moments are just internal and relaxing, and off you go.
Carol, can you describe what going inside means for you?
Well, I think it's, probably the closest thing would be if you're really, really tired and you crawl into bed and you get perfectly comfortable and then you just relax and let go and you know that you're going to fall asleep in seconds. There's that little space there where you forget about that you're in bed, you forget about your surroundings, hot, cold, whatever it is. It's irrelevant because you're folding into sleep. And it was similar to that, but again, different, because I also consciously knew that I was dying.
Yes.
So there was a bit of a concentration and kind of I was prepping to die, if that makes sense. So that's why I relaxed and tucked in. And I guess some people might choose to fight. And I guess if you were in a situation where you had to fight for your life, you probably would. But I was at the stage where the fight was over. I'd already been fighting for 3 days as I was bleeding out.
Yeah.
So I was at the end of the battle, not the beginning. So I think that's what's different. Whereas, if you're drowning or in a situation and your fight or flight kicks in, this was nothing like that. Fight or flight had long gone out and it had been drugged out of me regardless.
So you were on drugs at the same time then, when this was going on?
Well, no, they hadn't even come in to do my morning drugs. Because this
was before.
This was right as I woke up and I knew that I was done. And that's when I looked over at the woman and she knew what I meant because I couldn't even really say a word because I was already sinking.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm so happy, of course, you made it through, as you are as well, and as everybody else.
Yeah, as is my husband, who had a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old at the time.
Oh, and to imagine what he was going through.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, when he got the call from the hospital to get there now,
yeah,
he went into a bit of a panic, to say the least. I think he made it from downtown to the North Shore in about 14 minutes.
Well, you have one of the sweetest husbands alive.
Yes, I do.
And how has that experience changed you and your husband, if at all?
I think it would have been different if we didn't have young kids, because when you have young kids, you basically have your blinders on and it's pedal to the metal. So, it was a bleep on the radar. And Mark he's an athlete, so he's much more health conscious than I am, and much more, he takes really good care of his body. So I don't know that it really changed us per se. He did come into the hospital and try to put, ER on as a show for me to watch while I was getting a blood transfusion. And that was a tense moment, I must say.
But, yeah, because you're saying they pumped you with cold blood?
Yes, because they didn't have time to warm it. And so they take it directly out of the fridge. So not that I've ever had a blood transfusion. And it's funny because when pre the operation, my sister volunteered. She came with me to the pre-op meeting to volunteer to give blood, and the surgeon was like, "Well, don't be ridiculous. We won't need blood. This is just a routine surgery," and yada 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 yada. Anyway, of course it wasn't routine, and of course, I don't know whose blood I got, but thank you. And the worst part, I think, was never having a blood transfusion before. I could actually feel the blood because it was cold going everywhere in my body. And it took about an hour and a half because they did, I think, 4 to 5 bags.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was not a good experience. Now, if they warm it, you probably don't even notice. It'd be like an IV bag.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it's cold, you absolutely notice.
So you became very aware of the rest of your body
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when Mark tries to put ER on the show for me. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I do not want to watch a medical emergency show. I'm living it. So, yeah.
And how did it change you, if at all?
Well, I don't have a fear of dying.
Yeah. Okay.
I just don't. There's I don't want to see the shark fin as I'm going, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I always say to my kids, wherever I'm going, you'll follow just later. And I got lots of really good people in my life that have gone before me. Therefore, wherever they are, I'm going the same spot, presumably. And so I'm not uptight about it.
And what's your belief about that, Carol?
Well, I'm not overly religious. I was raised Catholic, so I don't think, for me, religion and death. I don't believe in the heaven or hell scenario. I like to think about it sometimes for other people, but I also don't believe that's the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think, from a scientific perspective, your body's your body, it's gone. Your soul is different. And so I believe in the soul and that it stays intact for a reason and goes somewhere, whatever it is, wherever it is.
That cycle continues.
Yeah, I do.
Throughout life, yeah.
Yeah, a type of energy or something that lives on. And however that lives on, away we go. And I always say to my kids that, if there is a heaven, then trust that I'll get it all dialed in and know all the ropes before you get there. I'll have it set.
You'll be the tour guide?
Absolutely. Plus, I'm looking up Elvis and checking out how Marilyn really died and, all those burning questions.
Yeah, I love that story that you shared, because you hear about this in the media and stuff. People have near-death experiences and it shifts their life around, and then they have different perspectives on it. And not that I would want to go through what you went through at all, but it's just nice to hear what you went through, because I think for people out there like me who are fearful of death, it puts a whole different perspective on it and a whole different spin on it, because you've experienced that and it's a moment of peace. And what really resonated with me was when you said you go inward. And I think for me, I fear going outward.
But you
And-
won't.
Yeah.
You won't.
Yeah.
I, it's a comforting thing to know that, in the final moments, it's just you regardless.
Yeah.
And I always say to my family too, look, don't worry about, rushing to the deathbed and being there to hold my hand, because I'll find it damn annoying. And so all the people that have sort of missed being with their mom or their dad or someone they loved right when they died, I think you'll find that it's a solo journey.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really need you there. You need to be there, but they don't need you there. And so I always say to my kids, hey, if I die and you're not there, it's okay. Because it won't make a difference to me. And I understand it'll make a difference to you. But then, I don't know. Because it is such a solo experience, I think I would be annoyed to try to be distracted from someone trying to stop you from going. If it's your time, if you're ready, away you go. And if you've got, kids crying or whatever, I don't know, I would have been annoyed. Because again, I was by myself with no one around me
Mm-hmm.
and no one I knew.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what the look was I gave the lady. It was probably the final gasp for, hey, if you can save me, could you push the button for me? Right? But at the end of the day, I couldn't articulate anything.
Yeah. And death for me also just really outlines the importance of knowing that we only have so many minutes to live, and to embrace that, what you have around you, and to be with that, what you have around you, and to cherish it. I think that's why I feel really blessed for just being where I am right now. Being here with you right now, Carol, is just an example, living life because
you
life
can.
and life will end, and make the most of it now.
And be grateful because, we've all known people, in their 20s who have died, or children who have died who didn't get the ride that we've gotten.
Yeah.
And so, be grateful for the ride, whatever length it is, and enjoy it along the way. And don't worry about death, because it's like worrying about being pregnant and giving birth.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to happen with or without you.
Yeah. Question for you, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. You grew up in a military family, right?
Yes.
Okay. What was your father in the military, or that your mother? Or
My
both?
father.
Your father. And so I've heard stories from people in the military about killing other people. And they say the death of another person essentially is something you will never forget. You took somebody else's life. And just curious to know your perspectives on that, because there are many, like what you're saying, people are dying all around the world, and sometimes by choice and sometimes not, like in terms of murders and things like that. But sometimes it's just, you might be in Palestine or Israel, and then a bomb goes off and it's the end of you. And curious if you learned anything from your father about what it was like for him to be in the military.
Well, he was in the Air Force, so what I learned was he thought Air Force was better than everybody else. And, because wars are won in the air. And I think it's different when you're in the Air Force and or you're dropping bombs or doing things like that than if you're a Marine and you're on the ground. Or, all the poor guys in Vietnam. So I think there's varying degrees of, horrendous types of war. But certainly from my father's perspective, being in the air is once removed from it. And so for him, You have the Marines, then you have the Army, then you have the Navy, and then you have the Air Force. That was his ranked order. And he's not alone in that. So Marines are expendable, and it's a very cavalier attitude about war, and I don't know that it's gotten better. For me, I mean, the worst thing is I can't stand people fighting. I mean, I'd probably do better, and I never have, seeing someone get shot than being around a fist fight. It just upsets, and I always step in, which drives Mark crazy. It's, even in movies, I can watch, people being shot, but if they're having a real fist fight, I can't even look. So it's interesting, but I think that's also a woman's perspective. And I hate hunting, and I remember I hit a bird with my car once, and I literally cried, and it was a starling, with all due respect. Starlings are an invasive species, but it affects me. So the death of something else affects me much more than, say, the death of myself, because I'm in control of it.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, it's mine. It's my life. It's my control.
Okay.
Therefore, I don't feel bad about me dying, and I'm not worried about me dying. But, I can't imagine something horrible happening to someone close to me, or animals, or people getting hurt, even if I don't know them. So, I'm a bit of a dichotomy that way, but you knew that. That's what's different for me.
And here in the land of deer, there was one time I was driving along the road close to the marina, and there was a deer that was in the middle of the road, laying down, and its head was up. Obviously,
that would kill me.
That was so hard for me to see, and people might say it's only a deer, but no. I see it as it's a life. It's a life. It's a living being. They may not suffering. Have the same. Yeah, it's suffering. They may not have the same cognition we do, but one thing is not expendable over another. Like I'll gladly kill a mosquito. Yeah. Can't stand them. But when it comes to other animals, just seeing them die is, yeah, I agree with you.
Well, yeah. Mark bought me a fake Uzi-looking thing that I can shoot flies and wasps with, which is going to be my new summer sport. I'm quite excited about it.
Okay. We can bring that on the paddleboard stuff that we do.
Absolutely.
The flotilla event.
It shoots little tiny pellets for you to kill wasps and things.
Oh, maybe don't bring it on the flotilla then.
No, I don't. I don't think you're supposed to use it on people.
Okay.
Well, plus it's really tiny, but yeah. So that's quite fun. So yes, I'll kill a wasp. I'll kill a mosquito.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm not a Buddhist, but yeah, when it comes to bunnies and raccoons and deer, I feel the same way. I'm heartbroken. It's like a puppy.
Well, and who knows, your soul might go into one of those creatures.
Yeah, I'd be really pissed if I came back as a wasp or something.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Being shot.
A fluffy bunny, I think, would be good. That would be neat.
Well, thanks.
And you.
Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate that.
Well, no, me being the fluffy bunny.
Oh, you
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I'm just talking about my own soul transformation. In the military, Carol, what do they teach anything, or do they prepare people there? Or have you heard anything of that? So if you're in the Marines, and of course your dad was in the Air Force, but let's say you're in the Marines or you're on the front lines, do they prepare people for what is quite possible as their own death? And I'm curious how they would do that.
Well, I think it's more of a rah-rah strategy. So rather than prepare them for death, they pump them up for, being a part of the group, for fighting for their country, for doing the right thing, for being brave. And I don't think there's a lot, certainly not, in the early 50s, 60s, 70s, they didn't spend a lot of time on counseling. They gave everyone in Vietnam drugs because what a horrific place that was. So they just kept them, stoned on LSD and various other things. So no, I don't think the military really, had the touchy-feely side to it. It was more like the football coach where, yeah, you're going out and getting a concussion and, shake it off and get back on the field. So that mentality, I think, has been in society for hundreds of years. And it's only now starting to change where we're looking at it going, 3 or 4 concussions is not a good thing. Is football a good thing? Wait a minute, even watching the Ukraine-Russian war, like, nobody's behind that war, not the Ukrainians, not the Russians. So you start to really see that it's a group of powerful people manipulating, poor people, for lack of a better description.
As you were sharing that story, I was smiling, and I was smiling because I saw a documentary. It was a book that I read once about terrorism and how people I wonder why people will sacrifice their lives to kill others. And what they said in this, again, I can't remember if it was a book or a video that I watched, but what they said is kind of what you said, Carol, is they pump up these individuals, and there are many highly educated individuals that will say, you know what, I'm going to stand in line for being a suicide bomber.
Yeah.
Because you're doing it for the community. It's the greater good. You all of a sudden become somebody of value. You're standing for something greater than yourself. And it was just very eye-opening. So when you shared what the military might do.
But that's all they have.
Yeah, yeah.
What else can they do?
Yeah,
exactly. How do you talk an 18-year-old into going to war?
Yeah.
Really, it would blow your mind. And that's where I think, when you're on the ground killing, that's why there's so much, PTSD. Because what a horrific thing to have to live through. We can't even, see a dead bunny. Mm-hmm. Imagine, the guy next to you being killed and your best friend and, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, this is a terrible metaphor, but it was kind of like I jumped out of a plane a long time ago. It was no big deal. Jumped out. It was fine. Chute opened. It was okay. Didn't do a lot of thinking, but then when I was bungee jumping from a crane into a body of water and I could see how close I was, things were a lot differently. I freaked out. I stopped. Yeah. I couldn't jump. And then eventually I went. But yeah, being front and center of that, like seeing somebody actually perish in front of you because a bullet went into their heart or whatever, and then you took away a father or a mother or a child of a parent, that is taking somebody's whole life away in that moment.
Yeah, and you're in survival mode. So you have to do it. It's not like you can say, okay, I've had enough of this, I'm out. Mm-hmm. So, I think war's horrific. I'm all for, putting the 2 leaders in a room and already have at her.
Oh, so totally.
Right? And may the winner emerge.
Yeah, it is. This also leads me to another topic that around just, I see us living in such a polarized world as well, that it's all this like black and white thinking, that you think this way and I think this way, and that's what leads to war and conflict, is this lack of ability to understand. I wonder what's really going on with the other side. I wonder what they're dealing with, because both sides think they're doing the right thing. But I think we're so set in our ways sometimes, and this is a whole other topic, Carol, but it just reminds me of, I recently watched a movie on Fidel Castro, mm-hmm. and it was done by an American and was going over his life around what he did. And there's many people that hate Fidel Castro, and there's so many people that love Fidel Castro. And I just found it such a brilliant movie done by an American who lived in New York. He went to Cuba every 5 years for about 40 years. He was a personal friend of Fidel Castro as well. And seeing Fidel Castro on this movie, he was such a jovial, high-spirited team player, believed in his people, believed that, you know what, we shouldn't have poverty in this world. We should have people that all have education, mm-hmm. healthcare, and all these different things. And then the USSR went the way of capitalism, and then things turned backwards for Cuba. But it reminded me of how there was so much violence and so many people dying just in respect to seeing other people as an enemy versus, you know what?
Yeah.
It's not always that case. We have to look at both sides to be more, I think, to even live a healthier life, because if we start worrying about other things, then that can actually cause more internal stress versus peace.
Yeah, and there's nuances to everything.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know that we could ever really understand, one side or the other fully. I don't know if you'd ever get the full truth out of, two parties that are warring. And early on, you start to judge. And, typically I go for the underdog. I don't know. It's interesting. But as you get older, you also realize that, not only is there no black and white, but pretty much everything's gray. Yeah. And so, you can't judge, and you can root, but you can't judge. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. To bring this around full circle, what would be your best advice to anybody who is who has that fear of death, disease? What would you say to people out there in terms of a mental health? Because this is a mental health podcast. So
Well, I think control what you can control. Death is the one thing we can't control. You didn't control your birth, and you're certainly not going to control your death. And I'm also a fatalist, that it's sort of written in the stars whenever you're going to die, however you're going to die. Don't be stupid enough to think that not going to the doctor, is going to keep you safe. If you can get help and you've got a disease, you have a fighting chance. If you don't get it diagnosed, you have zero fighting chance. So if you're really worried about death, you're not going to be a hypochondriac, but you're certainly going to go and take care of the things you can take care of. But at the end of the day, you're just following on the path that everyone else is. Mm-hmm. And it's not a scary path. It's just not.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for another piece of advice. When I was young, I thought I had everything. I was definitely a hypochondriac when I was young. I thought I had cancer. I thought I had this. And my mom would always take me to the doctor. And everything was always fine. So I have this habit of worrying about things. And also, I don't want to waste people's time, because I'm probably just imagining it.
So then why, when you had sore ribs for over 2 weeks, did you not want to get it checked out?
Because I felt there was fear in there. Yes, okay. Being honest, there.
So you finally have something, and you're not going to get it checked out.
I'm feeling way better now. Okay, so my ribs are healing. I'm not ready to go on a mountain bike journey yet. And then when I did go, the doctor said, we're not going to x-ray you because you don't need it. You're doing the right things. Yeah, I guess I just trust my body's going to heal, because I have been through aches and pains, and then things get better. And I definitely notice a difference in my body when I eat different, when I stress out. As you know, I'm alienated from my son. That's had an impact on my physical well-being and how I feel at times. But I have it's like a roller coaster for me, Carol.
Yeah, so we just have to get you around the corner and coast you in and work on coasting.
Yeah.
Because liken it in your mind to when you're in a hurry and you're trying to get from A to B. And you speed, and you run yellow lights, and you take chances, and you do everything. And then you pull up to the final red light, and the dude that annoyed you 2.5 miles ago is right beside you. And he was driving 40 the entire time. And you were going in between 100 and 120. That's what stress is. It's rather than try to do it at 100 and 120, just do 40 sometimes and keep going straight ahead, and you'll get there, if not at the exact same time, right behind.
Thank you. Carol, feedback from you. Have you noticed I've slowed down my speed?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. And, as you know, I have lovely pet names for you of all different kinds, but at the end of the day, you're getting more relaxed. You don't have your foot constantly on the gas and then constantly on the brake.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you get stressed or when you start to think about it or fearing, just lift that foot and just coast. And it's a much better journey, because the journey's the fun part. And so you don't want to ruin it by flying by and hammering on the brakes and stressing out and trying to pass someone and cutting other people off along the way. So, for me, it's a metaphor of driving.
Lovely metaphor. And yeah, I've reached a place in my life where I'm so content with everything. I was telling Fran about 2 years ago, I said, if I died, I would be okay, because I've done everything I wanted to do.
Yes.
I have nothing else. I have much to do and much to see and places to be and friends to be with. That's my fear, is losing that. But I'm at a place where I've lived my dreams. I've executed on my master plan of relaxing and being with people I love and care about. And yeah, I like how you just said, now I need to let go of the gas.
And don't necessarily assume you're losing something. So a fear of dying and not being able doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose something, because you have no idea what's next.
Yeah.
So, if you look at Native culture on dying, it's a much more relaxed, peaceful thing as well. And I just think North America, we're really wired to, be sad, and it's the end of something and finality. And I don't know what's next, but I do believe there has to be something.
Carol, that's a great way to end the show as well. And you know what? I would like my next guest to be somebody who has passed on, who can share what it's really like on the other side, one of those souls. But I don't know if I'll get one of those on the show. Carol, thank you for being a dear friend. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for starting off season 2 with a bang, and also just a realization and a peace of mind for me that everything's great. Everything is what it is, and it's always going to be fine.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah. And if we make the future, if we fear the future, what am I living into?
Yeah.
More stress, more anxiety, which leads to issues.
I always think, do I want my extra 10 years to be in my 90s? I don't think so. I want them back in my 20s.
Exactly. Carol, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. It was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.